To anyone who correctly started on the first part of this editorial over on the WizFish channel, welcome! I'm glad you seem to have enjoyed that video enough to check this one out. Hopefully you like my content on its own, without the smooth voice of a magical fish to back it up. And to anyone who's confused about that statement because they haven't watched part 1, this is actually part 2 of a short analysis of my time with Fallout 76. Part 1 can be found on WizFish's channel, so check it out. There's a card for it as well as a link in the description. If you enjoy it, maybe check out the content on his channel that he wrote himself. Watched the previous video? Good. So let's get into some of the more specific issues I encountered in my time with Fallout 76, because they're needed if we're to circle around later and paint a full picture. Firstly, the map sucks for indoor locations, because I didn't find a single indoor location that actually had a map. This also means the compass can range from useful to a complete train wreck, because oftentimes it's literally your only way to decipher which direction you need to go through maze-like interiors. That also means some events are awful to complete, like this power plant reparations one, because as far as I could find, there's only one area with entrances/exits to the massive complex interior unless you have the level 3 hacking ability. You have an hour of real time to repair 3 sections of the power plant, 2 inside and 1 outside. The compass struggles to tell you where the one pre-unlocked set of doors is that leads inside. Once you do get inside, you'd better remember exactly where that entrance is. If you don't finish in time, as you'd expect, you fail the mission and have to start it over again later, or in another server. On my first attempt, I spent the first 25 minutes looking for the entrance to the facility, since my map just had a vague circle on it and some markers that gave no indication of where I was actually supposed to go. I explored all along the top of the building, before I ended up going around and finding the outdoor repairs that needed doing. After I finished most of them, I found a door nearby that led inside. I used the next 27 or so minutes exploring inside and repairing everything there. With 8 minutes left, I started looking for the exit, now finally understanding that I had indeed missed some repairs outside. I frantically ran around getting more and more desperate, and enemies started respawning, etc., but I finally found the exit with less than a minute to spare, which was eaten up by the loading screen to the outer area, since the timer is server-wide. I had used most of my resources on the attempt to finish this event. Off camera, I decided to try it again the next day, and ended up getting it, but even then, I ended up wasting another 15 to 20 minutes trying to find a way out of the plant, despite trying to the best of my ability to memorize where the exit was as well. I have no idea why there don't seem to be interior maps, but it completely ruined this event, considering the plant itself is a confusing, repetitive mess. What's worse is that enemy respawns are not tailored to the event of an area. Like I said, most of the way through my first attempt, and also the second attempt, all of the enemies respawned, eating more and more resources I could no longer make up for since I'd already looted the place while exploring before the respawns. Is it too much to ask to not make an event with a 60-minute timer if the enemies are going to respawn halfway through it? And like I said earlier, disconnects are a regular thing, which just makes it infinitely worse. If you disconnect while playing, you lose progress since the last time the game saved, and it doesn't allow you to choose to re-enter the same server, meaning if you were in the middle of an event, as seen here, your progress on that event is reset. You cannot, as far as I can tell, manually save the game without exiting. How can you trust that you'll be able to complete a longer timed event if they completely reset when you disconnect? Honestly. Plus, despite disconnects setting you to a previous checkpoint, meaning it eats whatever loot you'd gathered since that checkpoint, it usually somehow saves the use of any resources during that time. So, wait a minute. I'm not allowed to keep the loot from that point forward, but I still lose ammo, stim packs, food, etc. that I spent. I get that this is designed to prevent people from exploiting loot container refills and whatnot by doing things like jumping to the dashboard and then re-entering to try and get better loot or something. But when you're not trying to exploit the system like that, it just feels like the game is working against you. Speaking of, this brings up the various issues you face if you are regularly running low on resources, which I was most of the time. Strange, since Joseph Anderson talked about having so many resources that he was actively throwing stuff away, so that implies to me that he's either referring specifically to the mid to late game, or they made some sweeping changes to drop rates since he made his video. I rarely had more than like 5 stim packs, and enough ammo for my regularly used guns to go through maybe 3 small marked locations, if everything in those locations goes well, that is. Because of these events and other issues, I was regularly running out of things. That, by the way, spells problems when you try to use the item wheel consistently. The menus themselves are already clunky enough since the game no longer pauses while you're using them. It reveals just how poorly optimized they are for quick usage, meaning the item wheel really is pretty mandatory. Problem is, if I run out of an item, it is removed from the item wheel. That means I tended to forget to add them back to the wheel as I got more of that item, and would only realize the mistake in the heat of battle where I had little chance of navigating the normal menu to heal myself properly or whatever. Why can't it just leave a memory of that item in the slot? That way it's already there when I get more of that item. For that matter, why does it seem like I can't choose which item to put in which slot? What happened to holding the favorite button and having the item wheel pop up so that I can manually select the slot I want? The low amount of healing items and such in 76 highlight just how much work the combat needs too, in particular the AI. It was on my last recorded session where I gave up on questing, as I said before. I ran into a pack of super mutants and just couldn't take it anymore. I used my last stim pack pretty swiftly, and was still being shot at by at least 2 or 3 of them. All of my alternate ways to heal were in my inventory, because again, I have to manually put them back in my favorites every time I run out of something, meaning I couldn't really use them on the fly during this encounter. It was then that I realized that there was no tactical way through this. I just had to run away. Fallout 76 isn't a tactical survival game, despite pretending to be. The AI doesn't gel well with the limited supplies for a bunch of reasons, like the fact that the more strategic weapons are gated behind levels, and that as soon as you're caught by one enemy, all of them in the immediate vicinity know your location. Again, this isn't a game about being clever to survive. It's a game of tug-of-war between your supplies and the collective health pool of your enemies. It's a game about a single gameplay loop. That's all that ultimately matters, because you can't easily leverage your supplies in more effective ways, at least not for the first 20 hours and 15 levels or so that I played through. And since perks gained through perk cards are at least semi-random, you can't leverage those to build a class around a specific playstyle, unless you get lucky. Let's speak about perk cards and leveling really quickly, because this system too is not very well implemented. To start, quests aren't worth doing for any rewards other than the experience you gain. They're the best way to level, but the actual rewards are never really anything you're not already finding elsewhere. And thanks to the changes made to it, the leveling system is confusing for a decent while, mostly thanks to a lack of proper explanation, and yet more confusing user experience design. With each level you gain, you can choose to add a single point to a special stat. After this, you get to pick one new card from a seemingly random assortment. Once you've done this, you can equip any card you have the special stats for. So, if you only have 2 strength and a perk card takes 3 strength, you can't equip it. But if you have 5 strength, you can equip that card. and any others that are equal or lesser than your 2 remaining strength. These cards can be freely unequipped, equipped, and swapped for others at any time. There's no cost to it. This does make some cards much more powerful to keep equipped than others. I don't need to keep my lockpicking card equipped, for example, since I can just swap to it when I find a locked container. There are no repercussions for this. I personally like that, but it does create needless tedium if you choose to swap cards regularly like this, and it raises the question as to why these types of perks were made into perk cards in the first place. They could have just as easily been a static level reward, or a main quest reward, or something like that. The only reason they seem to be perk cards is because they're trying to tie it into the leveling systems of old Fallout games. Even the packs of perk cards you can obtain are a bit confusing, or at least were for me, since if you have card packs you haven't opened, it'll ask you if you want to open them each time you enter the card screen. Cool, but then why doesn't it keep asking me until I use all of my packs? Because I was so confused about everything else surrounding leveling at first, I never noticed the button that allowed you to open the packs by choice, meaning I was constantly being asked to open a single pack from my growing collection of unopened packs each time I opened the card menu. What's so hard about saying, you have 3 unopened card packs, do you want to open them? And then letting me open them all in succession. I suppose it doesn't matter though, since most of the perk cards are in no way interesting. They're primarily just flat or redundant buffs to stats, or metaphorical keys to better exploration options like the different hacking and lockpicking levels. There are plenty of other issues that plague this game, so let's quickly fire off a few more. One constant problem is the server latency, which seemingly causes issues ranging from enemies who continue attacking for a second after they run out of health, to your own attacks just not registering, to the act of looting containers being painfully slow, to even things like aiming down sights just sort of not working when you press the button sometimes. Moving on, here are 2 examples of the bazillions of graphical glitches I ran into. These were the most obnoxious, to be fair. The Atomic Shop is in most ways a complete and utter ripoff, by the way, with the only positive note I can give it being that you can earn things for free fairly easily if you do nothing but grind challenges. It's not worth it though, considering I didn't find much that was particularly interesting, at least to me, and again, the real money equivalent costs for everything in the shop is insanely disgusting. Nuclear Winter was my breath of fresh air. In most ways, it's just a bog standard battle royale. But it's the Fallout weapons and equipment that makes it interesting, particularly since they don't waste much of your time on junk weapons. Rarely did I find something that wasn't really great at taking enemies on. It's thus far probably the best bit of Fallout 76, and it's the only time I felt that the servers worked okay and felt good enough to be in a full-price title. It's a shame that so far it only uses one small area of the map, and that there's no official solos only queue yet. It was also the only place where the game crashed, which would normally be something worth noting as a good thing, except that crashing was the least of my problems in this game. I want to stress that fact, by the way. I wanted to skip most of the complaining about glitches and stuff that everyone had already beat to death, but server issues, glitches, and that sort of thing were ever present and inescapable, despite me focusing more on design issues here. I do not want to sound like I'm downplaying these issues, or that they weren't that much of a problem. When I got disconnected, I regularly lost between 15 and 30 minutes of progress. That's no exaggeration, since I can check using my footage. That sort of thing isn't really okay in the best of games, let alone in games where I've got 1,000 other issues all adding up into one big mess. Heck, even the HDR implementation is terrible. It is the worst I think I've ever seen from a game. To start, it's completely faked. Big surprise. All they seem to have done is raise the peak brightness of pure whites, but in doing so they also raised the black levels, leading to muddy, grayish blacks that look awful. And there's something wrong with the color depth conversion or something, again likely because it's fake. It leads to tons of banding that isn't there in standard dynamic range, and severe desaturation of the whole image. To make matters worse, the gray-black levels combine with the banding to wash darker areas in an ugly, dark mass of gray that can make it really difficult to see in mildly low lighting. It's truly awful and looks significantly worse than the game does in SDR. This is my best approximation of what it looked like. That wouldn't have been a big deal, mind you, except that the only way to disable HDR when using an HDR display with this game is either through the console settings on the PS4 or your television where applicable. But what's worse is that there aren't any options in the game to tweak the image settings when in HDR mode. No brightness or saturation options, nothing at all. What is this, 1994? You were genuinely giving anybody who bought more expensive tech, hoping to get a better experience, a worse experience. Overall, I disagree with the idea some people have argued that Fallout 76 is worth playing if you like Bethesda's other Fallout games. Not only because I think it's wrong to advocate for supporting such horrendous business practices as 76 has been a part of, from not disclosing changes to collector's edition items and initially refusing to rectify said issue, to releasing the game in a laughably unfinished state and effectively blaming fans for just not getting it, to banning people based on guesswork and then trying to get them to write essays on why they shouldn't cheat, as well as doxing people. It may have been on accident, but I don't really care. It's absolutely fucking bullshit. And you know I mean that because I didn't censor it this time, despite really trying to keep this channel as professional as I can. But even if you remove all of this and pretend these outside factors don't exist, all you've got is a more broken Fallout game that's online. I still don't think it's worth playing on its own. This game doesn't offer the normal Fallout experiences. It doesn't even offer the proper variety in the core gameplay loop. It offers you an overpriced Skinner box and some even more expensive cosmetics. Don't ever buy Fallout 76 unless you can be 100% sure you'll enjoy it, and that it's no longer the broken mess it still is today. Play some Fallout 4 with mods instead, and you're bound to get a better experience, with fewer technical issues, and for cheaper. In closing, all I can say is that anyone who thinks human NPCs will fix or even improve Fallout 76 on their own is fooling themselves. A lack of human NPCs was never 76's biggest failing, and personally for me, in some ways, that omission could have actually been its biggest boon. So the fact that they're focusing on solving that problem doesn't give me hope when there are clearly so many other issues with the game that should realistically be taking priority. It's a complete misunderstanding of why people were truly upset with the game in the first place, and what they should be doing to fix that. But what do you guys think? Did you take part in the free week? Did you buy the game earlier on before that? Do you like it? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys next time.